The accidental contact. Captain Marcus Chen pressed his palm against the cold metal bulkhead of Unity Hub Station, feeling the subtle vibrations that told him the massive structure was functioning properly. As the lead human engineer on this diplomatic mission, he understood that keeping this neutral space station operational was just as important as the peace negotiations themselves. The Pyroxian Empire and humanity had been locked in cold hostilities for 37 years, and this was their first real chance at lasting peace. The docking bay hummed with activity as the final Pyroxian shuttle approached. Marcus watched through the reinforced viewport as the sleek, crystalline vessel maneuvered with impossible grace. Everything about Pyroxian technology seemed to flow like liquid fire, from their ship designs to their architectural preferences. It was beautiful, he admitted, but also alien in ways that made his engineering mind struggle to understand the underlying principles. "Remember," Captain Chen, Director Williams said, approaching with a datapad clutched in her weathered hands. "Absolutely no physical contact with the Pyroxian delegation. Their physiological responses to touch from other species can be ... catastrophic." The elderly diplomat's eyes held the weight of decades spent preventing wars rather than fighting them. "We've waited too long for this opportunity to let an accident destroy everything." Marcus nodded, adjusting his formal diplomatic uniform. The restrictions had been drilled into every member of the human delegation during months of preparation. Pyroxians generated intense heat when their emotions were triggered, and physical contact with other species could cause their internal temperatures to rise to dangerous levels. Some reports suggested their skin could reach temperatures hot enough to melt steel. Whether this was scientific fact or diplomatic exaggeration, no one was willing to test. The airlocks cycled open with a soft hiss, and the Pyroxian delegation entered the station. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he got his first close. Look at their species. They moved with fluid grace, their tall, slender forms draped in robes that seemed to shimmer with their own internal light. Their skin held a faint luminescence, ranging from pale gold to deep amber, and their features were sharp and angular in ways that spoke of evolution on a world very different from Earth. Leading the delegation was Ambassador Zara Nethys, and Marcus understood immediately why she had been chosen as their primary negotiator. She carried herself with quiet authority, her amber eyes taking in every detail of the station's human design. Her hair was a cascade of copper and gold that seemed to move with its own energy, and when she spoke, her voice carried musical undertones that made Marcus think of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Captain Chen," she said, inclining her head in what he recognized as a formal Pyroxian greeting. "I have studied the engineering specifications of this station. Your people's approach to environmental harmony is ... intriguing," the way she said. Intriguing suggested genuine interest rather than diplomatic politeness, and Marcus found himself unexpectedly pleased by her approval. "Ambassador Nethys," he replied, maintaining the proper distance as they walked toward the main conference chamber. "I hope our accommodations meet your delegation's needs. We've adjusted the atmospheric composition and temperature controls based on your specifications." He gestured toward the environmental readouts displayed along the corridor walls. "Everything can be modified in real time if necessary." As they entered the conference chamber, Marcus noticed how the Pyroxian delegation arranged themselves with careful spacing, never coming closer than arm's length to each other or to the human representatives. It was like watching a complex dance, where the steps were measured in safety margins and cultural protocols. The negotiations began with formal presentations of credentials and statements of peaceful intent. Marcus found himself studying Ambassador Zara as she spoke, noting how her skin's luminescence seemed to respond to her emotional state. When discussing territorial boundaries, her glow intensified slightly. When addressing trade agreements, it settled into a warm, steady radiance. It was fascinating from a scientific perspective, but also beautiful in a way that made him forget about diplomatic protocol. 3 hours into the discussions, the station's artificial gravity began to fluctuate. Marcus immediately recognized the signs of a cascading system failure in the gravitational generators. Red warning lights flashed as computer alerts announced the malfunction, and everyone in the room felt the unsettling sensation of their inner ears struggling to adapt to the changing gravitational field. Everyone remained calm, Marcus announced, moving toward the environmental controls. This is a manageable situation. The backup systems will engage in approximately 60 seconds. He was already running diagnostics through his portable interface, identifying the failed components and calculating repair sequences. But the fluctuating gravity had already created an unexpected crisis. Ambassador Zara, caught mid-gesture while explaining a point about mining rights, lost her balance as the artificial gravity shifted unpredictably. She stumbled sideways, her normal grace disrupted by the changing forces acting on her body. Without thinking, Marcus stepped forward and caught her arm to prevent her from falling. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds, but the effect was immediate and unmistakable. Zara's eyes widened in what looked like shock and fear combined, and she pulled away from him with a sharp intake of breath. "Don't touch me," she whispered, but her voice carried resignation rather than anger. She looked down at her arm where his hand had been, and Marcus watched in fascination and growing alarm as her skin began to change. The gentle luminescence that had been barely visible before started to intensify, growing brighter with each passing moment. "Ambassador," Director Williams said urgently, "what's happening? Are you injured?" The other Peroxians in the room had backed away even further, their own skin beginning to glow with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as agitation or fear. Zara looked up at Marcus, and he saw something in her amber eyes that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. It wasn't just fear or embarrassment. There was vulnerability there, and something that might have been longing mixed with regret. "I need to explain," she said quietly, her voice strained as her skin continued to brighten. "The briefings your people received were diplomatically edited for simplicity. The reality of pyroxian contact responses is more complex than your scientists were told." Marcus watched as the environmental sensors throughout the conference room began registering. Temperature increases. The air itself seemed to shimmer around Zara like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and perspiration beaded on her forehead despite the room's controlled climate. "What's really happening to you?" he asked, maintaining his distance, but ready to help if needed. The engineering part of his mind was already calculating heat dissipation rates and wondering about the station's thermal management capabilities. Zara's skin deepened to a richer gold, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone admitting a dangerous secret. "Physical contact with another sentient being triggers what our medical specialists call thermal resonance syndrome. It's an involuntary biological response that prepares our bodies for intimate pair bonding." The words hit the room like a plasma discharge. Director Williams stepped backward, her diplomatic training finally encountering a situation beyond her experience. The other human negotiators exchanged glances of barely controlled panic, while the Pyroxian delegation watched their ambassador with expressions that might have been sympathy or resignation. "My body temperature will continue rising," Zara continued, her breathing becoming more labored as her internal heat increased. My nervous system is flooding with bonding hormones and thermal regulation compounds. If the process runs its full course. She trailed off, closing her eyes as if fighting against invisible forces. What happens then? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would complicate everything. Complete thermal resonance creates a permanent neurochemical bond between the individuals involved, she said softly. What your species might understand as imprinting or soulmate bonding. Once established, the connection cannot be severed without severe psychological trauma to both parties. Marcus felt the weight of accidental responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. How do we stop it? There has to be a way to reverse the process. Zara opened her eyes and met his gaze with surprising directness. There are only two options. Either the bonding process completes naturally with willing participation from both individuals, or, she hesitated, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her amber eyes, or the triggering individual must permanently sever all contact immediately. The emotional shock might be enough to disrupt the syndrome before it reaches completion. Understanding dawned horribly as Marcus realized what she was asking. Around them, the temperature continued to rise as her thermal output increased. The station's environmental systems were working at maximum capacity to maintain safe conditions, and he could hear the strain in the humming of the ventilation fans. You're asking me to abandon you, he said quietly, asterisk. But you're scared, Marcus observed, reading the fear that she was trying so hard to hide behind her diplomatic training. Terrified, she admitted. Because despite the accident, despite the biological compulsion, I have to tell you something. That makes this situation even more complicated. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I've been attracted to you since our first communication 3 months ago. Your engineering reports, your consideration for our environmental needs, your dedication to making this piece work. Her voice grew softer. I thought I was maintaining proper professional distance, but I've been looking forward to meeting you in person. I've been hoping we might find common ground. The admission hung in the air like a challenge to everything both sides had assumed about interspecies relationships. Marcus found himself stepping closer despite every protocol he'd been taught, drawn by something that had nothing to do with diplomatic necessity and everything to do with the vulnerable honesty in her voice. Then we have something in common, he said, his words carrying across the charged atmosphere of the conference room. Because I've been doing the same thing. The solution and new alliance to conference room fell silent except for the increasingly strained humming of the environmental systems. Ambassador Zara's skin now glowed with the intensity of heated metal, and Marcus could feel the waves of heat radiating from her body even from several feet away. The other diplomats had retreated to the far corners of the room, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern and barely controlled panic. Dr. Sarah Kumar, the expedition's xenobiologist, stepped forward with her portable scanner active. Captain, her core temperature is approaching 48 degrees Celsius and rising steadily. At this rate, she reached dangerous levels within the hour. She looked up from her readings with professional concern mixed with scientific fascination. But there's something else. The thermal output isn't random. There's a pattern to it, almost like her body is trying to establish some kind of resonance frequency. Marcus turned to Zara, who was leaning against the conference table for support. Her breathing had become rapid and shallow, but her eyes remained focused and intelligent despite the obvious distress. What does that mean, the resonance pattern Dr. Kumar is detecting? Zara managed a weak smile despite her condition. Your scientist is perceptive. The thermal resonance doesn't just create heat. It's designed to synchronize neural frequencies between bonded pairs. In successful pairings, both individuals learn to regulate and direct the thermal energy. It becomes a shared resource rather than a destructive force. Commander Vex, the senior Pyroxian military advisor, spoke for the first time since the crisis began. His deep voice carried undertones of regret and concern. Ambassador Nethys speaks truth, but there is danger in incomplete bonding. Without proper synchronization, the thermal buildup will continue until her body systems fail from the strain. And the heat she generates could damage this station's critical systems. As if summoned by his words, station alarms began sounding throughout the corridor. Marcus's communication device crackled with urgent reports from the engineering staff. The environmental control systems in 3 adjacent sections had shut down to prevent overload, and the structural integrity sensors were detecting thermal stress in the bulkheads near the conference room. Captain Chen, Director Williams said urgently, "I'm evacuating all non-essential personnel from this section. You need to make a decision quickly. We can't risk the entire station for one individual, regardless of the diplomatic implications." Marcus looked around the room at the concerned faces of both delegations, then back at Zara. She was clearly fighting to maintain consciousness as her body temperature continued its relentless climb. Her diplomatic composure had finally cracked, revealing the frightened woman beneath the professional facade. "There's something I need to understand," Marcus said, addressing both Zara and Commander Vex. "You mentioned that successful bonding allows both individuals to control and direct the thermal energy. Does that mean a human could potentially help stabilize her condition?" Commander Vex exchanged glances with the other Pyroxian delegates before answering. "In theory, yes. But there has never been an interspecies thermal bonding. We do not know if human neural patterns are compatible with Pyroxian resonance frequencies. The attempt could kill both of you." Dr. Kumar looked up from her scanner with excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. "Captain, I'm reading something extraordinary. Your proximity to Ambassador Zara is already affecting her thermal patterns. When you move closer, her temperature stabilizes slightly. When you move away, it spikes higher. There's definitely some kind of biological interaction occurring." Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him as he made his decision. The engineering part of his mind was calculating probabilities and risk factors, but something deeper was driving his choice. He thought about the months of communication with Zara, the growing respect and admiration that had developed through their professional relationship. He thought about the peace treaty that hung in the balance, and the thousands of lives that could be saved if humans and Pyroxians could learn to work together. "Zara," he said, stepping closer despite the waves of heat washing over him, "I need you to tell me exactly what's required for the bonding process to complete safely." Her eyes widened in surprise and something that might have been hope. "Marcus, you don't understand the commitment involved. Thermal bonding isn't temporary. It creates permanent neurochemical links that affect both individuals for life. You would be tied to me in ways that your species has no equivalent for. Maybe that's exactly what both our species need to understand," Marcus replied, reaching out his hand toward her. "Maybe the solution to our diplomatic problems isn't avoiding connection, but learning how to manage it safely." Zara stared at his outstretched hand, her internal struggle visible in the fluctuations of her skin's luminescence. "The process requires sustained contact and emotional synchronization. I'll need to teach you to feel the thermal patterns and Help me direct the energy constructively rather than destructively. But if something goes wrong, then we'll face it together, Marcus said simply. That's what partnerships are supposed to be about, isn't it? With visible effort, Zara lifted her hand and placed it in his. The contact was like grasping a piece of heated metal, but Marcus forced himself to maintain the connection. Immediately, he felt something like electric current flowing between them, and his own body temperature began to rise in response to hers. Focus on your breathing, Zara instructed, her voice gaining strength as their thermal patterns began to synchronize. Feel the heat as energy, not destruction. Think about channeling it toward something productive. Marcus closed his eyes and let his engineering instincts take over. Instead of fighting the rising heat, he imagined it as just another form of energy that needed to be properly managed and directed. He thought about power distribution systems, about thermal regulation, about the elegant ways that energy could be transformed from one form into another. Something clicked in his mind, and suddenly he could feel the thermal patterns that Dr. Kumar had detected. They were like a complex rhythm, a heartbeat made of heat and energy that was trying to find harmony between two very different biological systems. With growing confidence, he began to help Zara direct the energy flow. The environmental systems, Zara said with sudden understanding. We can use the thermal output to power the station's heating grid instead of overloading the cooling systems. Her skin's glow intensified, but now it seemed controlled and purposeful rather than chaotic and dangerous. Working together, they channeled the excess heat through the station's thermal distribution network. Marcus used his engineering knowledge to identify the most efficient pathways, while Zara controlled the energy output with increasing precision. What had started as a potentially destructive crisis became a demonstration of incredible cooperation. Within 30 minutes, they had not only stabilized Zara's condition, but actually improved the station's overall energy efficiency. The environmental systems that had been straining to cope with the thermal overload were now running at optimal levels. Powered by the controlled output of their synchronized thermal resonance, Dr. Kumar's scanner showed both of their vital signs, stabilizing at healthy levels, though Marcus could still feel the warm current of connection flowing between them. It was like being aware of another person's heartbeat as clearly as his own, and the sensation was both strange and oddly comforting. The bonding process is complete, Commander Vex announced, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and approval. I have never seen such rapid synchronization, even among our own people. This suggests that human and pyroxian neural patterns are more compatible than we believed possible. Director Williams approached cautiously, her diplomatic instincts struggling to categorize what had just occurred. Captain Chen, Ambassador Zara, what exactly does this mean for the peace negotiations? Marcus and Zara exchanged glances, and he realized he could sense her emotional state as clearly as if she had spoken her thoughts aloud. She was feeling the same mixture of wonder, relief, and growing affection that was flooding through his own awareness. Over the following hours, the peace negotiations took on an entirely different character. Instead of cautious diplomatic protocols, both sides found themselves discussing joint research projects, shared exploration missions, and cultural exchange. Programs. The thermal bonding between Marcus and Zara became a symbol of possibility rather than a cautionary tale about interspecies contact. Dr. Kumar established the first xenobiological research partnership, working with pyroxian scientists to study the bonding phenomenon and its implications for future human pyroxian cooperation. Commander Vex and Director Williams began planning joint military exercises focused on rescue and disaster relief operations, where Pyroxian thermal abilities could be combined with human engineering expertise. As the formal peace treaty was signed, 3 days later, Marcus stood beside Zara in the observation deck, watching the departure of the various diplomatic shuttles. Their hands remained intertwined, and he could feel the steady warmth of their connection like a constant reminder of what they had accomplished together. "Do you regret it?" Zara asked quietly, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewport. "The bonding, I mean. The permanent commitment to someone you barely knew." Marcus considered the question seriously, feeling the contentment and partnership that had grown between them over the past few days. The thermal bond had indeed created a permanent connection, but it had also opened possibilities he had never imagined. Through their shared awareness, he had learned more about Pyroxian culture and thinking in 3 days than months of diplomatic briefings had taught him. "I regret that it took an accident to bring us together," he replied. "But I don't regret the choice to complete the bonding. I think maybe this was exactly the kind of bridge our peoples needed. Someone willing to take the risk of real connection instead of maintaining safe distances." Zara smiled, her skin taking on the warm golden glow that he was learning to associate with happiness and affection. "The thermal resonance works both ways, you know. I can feel your contentment as clearly as you can sense mine. It's comforting to know that the bond brings joy to both of us," as they watched the stars together. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with diplomatic success and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. The accident that had nearly destroyed the peace talks had instead created something unprecedented, proof that different species could not only coexist, but thrive together in ways that neither could achieve alone. The thermal bond between them would indeed last for life, but Marcus was beginning to understand that some commitments were worth making, especially when they opened doorways to futures that neither species could have imagined on their own. In taking the risk to help Zara, he had not only saved her life, but discovered a partnership that would reshape the relationship between humans and Pyroxians for generations to come. Asterisk.